Hello, Taft College. This is Joshua Vasquez, the president of the ASO, our college's student government. In celebration of Black History Month, in which we remember and recognize all of the contributions that African Americans have made in our society, Patrick Elia and the Cougar Echo, our college's student newspaper, have had the great opportunity of interviewing Pamela Haynes. Pamela is the current president of the California Community College's Board of Governors. She is also a California Community College graduate and an alumnus of Harvard Grad School. Please stay with us as the Cougar Echo conducts this interview on behalf of the Taft College student body.
Hi, I'm Kennedy. It's nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
So my first question is about special education. And so I was curious if you ever have in the past, or if your future plans, like how are you going to commit to special education? And for those who have special needs, getting them into a college or a 2-year, and even getting them transferred into a 4-year.
So on our community college campuses, and I believe that this is system-wide, so at least 115 of the colleges have a program that's called DSPS, and it's for those who may have some challenges rather than a disability. We all have challenges. And so that program is set up so that students can engage and make certain that they get the services and the support that they need in order to be successful.
Okay.
And let me also say this piece. As I said, we all come with, we're all different. We all come with very different challenges. And so one of the benefits of a community college education is that we accept the top 100% of students. That's whether you have a disability, a challenge, whether or not you have a high school diploma. We accept all. And for me, the thing that I say is that the goal we need to be aspiring to is meeting students where they are.
Okay, yeah. And then my next question is, what kind of barriers will be removed in order to quell the teacher shortage? So when, for instance, having a large group of students, trying to get them into a community college, I obviously see it can be difficult having a large group of students and then only a few teachers that could be potentially teaching them, especially in online courses. And so what could be potentially changed in order to help more students be able to have that connection with teachers when there's not as many of them?
So that was I did go through all of the questions, not so much for answers, but just to see. So what I hear you saying is that because there are so few teachers, that acts as a barrier for educating enrolling students or returning students. Is that the gist of your question?
Yes.
Okay. So what I would offer is that online allows the opportunity for instruction to have more students than less. Now, the barriers to that is how does an instructor become proficient in this new modality, i.e., an online modality, which means that one teaches differently. Mm-hmm. The resources, the visuals, how does one engage in an online setting? Because you're not face to face, and mm-hmm. those are the skills that are necessary. It isn't necessary, and those can ultimately be barriers to student success, as opposed to just using online versus in brick and mortar in person educating. Mm-hmm. Those instructors that have embraced online, what I have heard back from them, and this is actually prior to COVID, where almost 100%, 90% of our instructors went online, is that what online has taught them is beneficial, not just in the online, but when they went back into their classrooms, they had other different skills in which to engage students in a very different way. I say that because all of us have our ways of learning. Some of us are much more tactile. Some of them have to see things, hear things, write things, and then repeat things in order to get it. And so it is, and that's an adult learning. Uh, it is how adults learn. It's actually how children and students learn. But our instructors have not been, especially at the community college level, have not been as adept. So when you've gone into traditional community college classrooms, in many cases, they're still teaching. They're still teaching in the front of the class. It's still the whole group, but that's not the best way for folks to learn. And so it's making those adaptations to the classroom, to adapt to team teaching, to adapt to group learning, that you're learning among your peer learning. It means smaller groups, even within a classroom. It means engaging in a very different way. And it's not just lecture, listen, a few questions. So that's what I would say. Those are the changes that have to happen relative to online. And teachers have to be much more proficient in making certain that the resources that students need in that environment are still there for them. Because we live in a 24/7 environment. Our students are working, they have families, they've got responsibilities. So how do we adapt our support services in a way that they can still access them when they need to, as opposed to Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 or 9 to 7?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then my last question is, how can you care for kids even before they join the school system?
Okay, so you're talking about K-12.
Yes.
So let me tell you how that happens. Right now, we now have pathways, and we now have dual enrollment, in which we have high school students who are either on their campuses taking a course that is college, that's making them college ready, and actual college courses that they can get units for, and toward graduation, toward their major. That is currently happening, but that requires memorandums of understanding with the district or with the sister campus. We need to do more of that, and we need to do it. We need to do it not just for our most advanced students. We need to do it for those students who don't think that they're college material. We really do have to. And so part of that is working with faculty, our faculty, working with the instructors, especially in certain courses, which are gateway courses, and then other courses, to let the high school faculty know this is the expectation, because I think that there is a disconnect between what high school and high schoolers think community colleges. They think it's second best.
Yeah.
And they think it academically, it is not challenging. They think that the CSU is challenging and the UC is challenging. And boy, are they surprised when they come onto a college campus and there is rigor there. And there are expectations there. So it is pushing down the expectations, both to students where we can, but definitely to counselors and to faculty. A little thing like, when does a student take their math, and when do they take their English, can determine whether or not how well they're going to do in a transfer level math and English, especially if they want to transfer to a UC or a CSU. So how courses are, so if you take that in your sophomore year, well, you may have forgotten half that by the time you get over. So it's about sequencing of courses, and it's that communication that has to happen, that goes both ways, from the community college faculty, and the community college counselors, and the high school faculty, or high school instructors and then the counselors, so that they know what's being offered and how to and make certain that the students know about it.
Okay, well, thank you for answering my questions.
Welcome.
Patrick, I don't know who you wanted to ask next.
I think it's Kamaya right up next.
Okay, hi, I'm Kamaya.
Hi, Kamaya.
My first question is, what made you choose to become a student advocate?
So first and foremost, I've been an advocate. I started so I was born and raised in LA. I got to Sacramento after I finished graduate school, and I was old by that time. I had 2 children, both of them in college by the time I moved to Sacramento. But in my first job down in Los Angeles, I helped to form a union. The union that was there was were not representing the voices of workers as I saw it, and I wanted to get engaged. I wanted to get involved. My thinking has always been very progressive. I come out of the civil rights era, and so that's where I learned how to be an advocate. Relative to that, I ultimately worked for the union and went full time with them. And that's actually gave me the opportunity. I did some work that got noticed when folks from Harvard came to the company, and a question was asked, well, y'all don't have anything that's union employee and employer management. And there was only one program. It was the program that I established within the body of the union. So when you talk about advocacy, once you learn those skills and understand that, I'll say it a little more crassly, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And so it's critically important to be at the table. It's critically important to voice those issues that so many folks who are not at the table don't have an opportunity to do, and to speak as one can to the issues that confront. One of the things that was very profound to me was when I was asked in that capacity to come up to Sacramento, and I had not been to Sacramento before, and to speak to some legislators and to go to a hearing in which an issue of concern was being presented. And what I found fascinating when I went to a few of those meetings, most of the folks who go to meetings where decisions are made do not look like you and me. They don't come from sometimes the backgrounds of folks that we would expect that these laws and these regulations are being designed supposedly for, but in many cases not so much so. But in the room usually are folks with suits on. They are advocates, and they have sway. They have sway based on the contributions they make to the members. They have sway based on their expertise and their relationships. But I have to tell you, when there were folks in the room that looked like you and me, who had gathered because they cared about an issue, they either got on a bus, got in a car, and they sat in that audience, the tenor of the conversations changed. They changed among the members because they knew that people were in the room. And that was a lesson that I've kept with me, that it is, that part of the advocacy is critically important. To be able to speak truth to those who are making the rules. And then hopefully some of those folks who are speaking that truth become electeds. They go and get their education. They learn about the issues. You don't have, or they go into organizations that make a difference in communities. So that's a little bit about how I got there. And relative to students, I guess for a long time, I never quite shared my own pathway. My own pathway was I started at LA Community College District in one course. And I got to tell you, so true story. I got an F in that class. I should have never taken that class. It was like Chinese art. But anyway, and it was too far. I had to take 2 buses to get there, but it was right out of high school. So my mother knew a friend. We lived in right off of Pico in Los Angeles, and where we lived, there was a bus to Santa Monica that would take me to Santa Monica College, and that was when community college students could not go out of their district. Santa Monica was out of the district because it was Santa Monica. You had to go to an LA community college. But she found an address, and so that's how I started at Santa Monica. But my pathway was long, very elongated. I got married at the age of 21. I dropped out. I didn't take enough full-time courses, so I didn't have. In the 2 years that I was there, if I'd taken full loads, then maybe I would have been able, because my goal had always been to transfer. So the long story of it is, I have, for a very long time, I was struggling to work. I gave birth to 2 children, had a husband during all of that, during part of that time, and then got divorced. So my pathway was trying to work and go to school. And so it took me an inordinate amount of time. So for me, I understand what that looks like. I understand what that feels like. I understand, and I would not want my pathway up for anybody else, because too many folks fall by the wayside. But the benefit of me being able to stay the course wasn't just about tenaciousness, which was very important. It was about that I had a good job that was a 24/7, that I could create a time to go during the daytime, and I had childcare and I had help to do that. So all of the things that act as barriers, I understand them because I've experienced them firsthand.
Thank you. Patrick, I just thought of another question, if it was okay for me to ask.
If it's okay with President Pamela, I'm down for it.
Sure.
For other people, because I enjoy the fact that you said we don't see enough of ourselves at the table during the conversations, what would you suggest for other students or people in the community who are trying to get into student advocacy? Where should they start?
Where should they start? Well, they can start at their board meetings. They can start there. Now, and I understand that many students are challenged relative to when board meetings are held, whether or not it's agendized item. But the reality is that any person can come to a board meeting, and usually they have a time to take comments, 3 minutes, but comments from anyone sitting in the audience. There's a card you fill out, and you can speak to any of the issues that are impacting students on your campus. You can speak on, like I said, on any issue, and it begins to inform your board what you are facing and what some of your friends and other students are facing on your campuses. The voice of students, just like the voice of vets and the voices of all kinds of folks in community, help to inform the decisions that that they are going to be making and voting on. So that's a first place of finding advocacy. Finding advocacy relative to your president of the college, having that person come to one of your meetings or to come to an assembly and speak to your questions and your issues. In many cases, brown bag lunches. Those have sometimes they've been organized by the district and by the president or by of the college. And so those are places where you can hone your skills, share your perspective, and learn from that process. And I guess that's that. I mean, you can always come to Sacramento. There's always folks there, but I would start at home. I would start in your backyard first.
Okay, thank you. That was a perfect answer.
So now it's my turn.
Okay.
And my first question, and this is also coming from another member who couldn't join us today. We were both wondering, what was it like going to Harvard while also representing the African American community? Did you feel any pressure doing it?
So, okay. So, was it, so, that wasn't, okay. So, so my experience was, somebody suggested that I apply to Harvard. Someone that had done some work for our union and for the company, and he was an instructor at Harvard's Business School, and he took a bit of a liking to me, and basically said, "Oh, I think you would be a great candidate." And I just laughed in his face. I'm born and raised in California. I had two kids, adolescent children at the time, teenagers, I should say, not adolescent, but teenagers. And I had a house, and so it was like Harvard. And I had toyed with the idea of going to graduate school, but I was probably closer to going to UCLA, but they did not have their program was more public sector or a business degree, and I didn't have an interest in working within the innards of business, so I just didn't see that. I was, because of my experience working in labor, I just did not see that to be my sort of pathway. So I had sort of put that on hold. But so I got that encouragement to apply, and then I sort of I was busy. I put it aside, and then what Harvard had at the time, and again, I went to graduate school. I did not go to undergraduate school at Harvard. I got a phone call from a colleague, from someone who had been in the labor movement, who was in the program, and Harvard had set this up that you sort of called your own, because Harvard made it easy. One, they give you money. They want you to succeed, and the easy part of that they made it was they gave you an application, but all you had to do was on this first page, fill out the first page, name, address, phone number, and a few other questions. You could tear that off and put it in. That's all I did. And so when I got the call, I got encouraged by someone that I, from an industry or from an organization that I respected, who said, fill out the application. And so I did. And I have a bit of a phobia around taking standardized tests. I have a bit of phobia. So I always overstudy. I always. And so taking the GRE was not something that I wanted to be able to do. So I did. I got all the books. I did all the studying. And I said, oh my God, this is where they're really not going to accept me in. And my math skills are limited. It's not my favorite subject. You can give me all kinds of other stuff, but math. So I took the GRE, and I was working. Actually, I was working for the labor union that I spoke of, and we were in Atlanta on a project, and I still hadn't filled out the complete application. And they dropped me off one morning at the Atlanta Public Library and said, you fill out that goddamn application. We will pick you up at 5 o'clock. If it's not filled out, you're going to be sitting in the car doing it. And so I did. I filled that out. We mailed it. I mean, they actually took me to the post office to mail it. But I say that in preface of what I expected Harvard to be and what Harvard actually was. One of the best experiences I had was going to Harvard, but it was a culture shock. The culture shock was this: Harvard and many of the Ivy League schools are considered the bastion of liberal thinking. I'm born and raised in LA. I am third generation. My family got to LA in 1919, so we've been there for little over 100 years. I got confused by the term liberal thinking as opposed to progressive thinking. There is a difference, and so there's academic thinking that goes on, and I truly enjoyed that dialogue. What we had was we used case studies. We use case studies to dissect issues, problems, and solutions. We use team teaching, and that is, in many cases, it wasn't singular learning that you did on your own by yourself. You did it within a group. And for me, that was one of the best ways of learning, because my colleagues, the students that the groups that we were in came from all different parts of the country, different parts of the world, because that program had an international group of adults in the program, in this particular program. And so people read the case study, but they came at their interpretation, their issues from very different perspectives, which meant I got the benefit of all of that within that one case study. And then we moved to another case study. So I can't, and so I'm a believer, I bring that information along with me, and I've carried it with me, because the best learning happens both on the job and on jobs and in the classroom, where you can bring everyone's knowledge, everyone's experiences into the conversation, because they're looking at it from varying different vantage points. So that's the one lesson. I think that the case management is still being taught, at least at the Kennedy School. Let me also say that the public sector, the Kennedy School is a school, of graduate school for government, for public, and for public. So there are a number of folks who had been in government, were instructors. There were sort of, if you had lost your job in the administration, or administration had changed, what you did was you went to the Kennedy School to teach. And it may be for 3 years, it may be for 5 years, what have you. So it was a place where, and anybody, whether they were nationally or internationally, stopped by. So at least every week, multiple times during the week, we would have an international person from some country, from some state department, who would stop by and do a speaking engagement. So it was rich relative to that. So I enjoyed that piece of it, and it was forward thinking, things that I had time to think. I had time to look at my own personal experiences and analyze those aspects in a way that, and then within the context of all that was going on. So, however, Harvard sits within a stone's throw from Boston. It sits within a stone's throw, and I don't know how much you know about Massachusetts, but Boston in particular, there have been, let me put it this way, Boston, Chicago, and this was back more than 30 years ago, the two most racist cities this side of the Mississippi, in terms of practices and in terms of the angst and the racism that was embedded within governmental institutions, as well as housing and anything else. So when I got accepted, there was a pamphlet in the information that I got before I came. That pamphlet was specifically for African American students. We welcome you. We want you to have a wonderful experience, but don't go to Roxbury. Don't go to South Boston. So what did I do? I went to Roxbury and I went to South Boston with a few friends, but it was, and this was during a time in which Boston's housing HUD governmental program had basically said to South Boston, you can no longer have your list of folks that you're going to let into public housing. We're going to meld those two lists with everybody else in Boston, and folks have a right, regardless of their race, to get public housing if they're in need of it. You cannot have your own list. You would have thought that they had said, your mama is whatever. And so when they had community hearings, I and a couple of friends went to the second meeting. The first meeting, the N-word had been used. The first meeting, they had turned the place out. The second meeting, we walk in, and and I know I'm taking long, but I find this part fascinating. Because housing is critical for a whole lot of people, especially public housing. So there's this group that decided that it really wanted to make some inroads into this particular issue, was multiracial and ethnic. And so we went in two cars. Oh, and we were told we cannot, for the organizers of this, the community folks in South Boston, we cannot protect you. You come on your own, but we can't protect you. It's probably a better word, but we're not responsible for anything that happens, because the first meeting, they had slick tires. Okay, so we come in two cars and we get out of our cars and we're getting ready to go. And this is held at an elementary school in the auditorium theater of the elementary school. And Boston schools are old, so this was not a new school, this was an old school. And so it's lots of lunch benches and lunch seats. And we're walking in sort of just before the meeting is to start. So everybody's already in there. But before we walk in, the white folks say, well, should we walk in together? And I try to keep a poker face. This term was not available to me then as it is now. What the fuck? Okay. But they decided that we would walk in together. So I said, okay, there's some redeeming factors. We walk in and the room comes to a hush. Now the meeting hasn't started, but people are talking among themselves. We walk in, there's probably about 4 Black folks, and maybe 4 or 5 white folks. There's 2 people that are Black besides the 4 of us in that meeting. One of them is the director of housing for Boston, and you can hardly tell she's Black, but she's Black. And one of the camera people is Black. And then there's the 4 of us. And I'm saying, oh my God. And there are no seats together. So we all start going down these aisles trying to look for that one seat. And this has always given me hope. I'm walking to try to find a seat. And as I pass, and everybody is seated at this point. On my left, a male voice says, "I'm glad you're here." And I said, "Oh my God, okay, let me take a look at who that is because I may need him before the meeting is over." But there were no N words, tires weren't slashed, and we were just there to listen to the conversation. But those are the tensions that arose while I was there. Best experience. I'd never been called a nigger before, and on the bus I got called a nigger with my daughter, and so I looked back, and I said, I was just surprised, and so my daughter was with me, and she was a Laker fan at that point, so I think she had a Laker shirt on, or sweatshirt, and she says, "Mom, the lady's just crazy. She's just crazy." Okay, all right. So I became acutely aware of race, and I'll finish the story by saying I became acutely cognizant of race in Boston. What I was able to do from that experience was to then say, this was not about there not being racism in California. It presented itself differently. It is reflected differently. So for example, people will smile at you, and this is racism in Boston was out there. You could see it, you could hear it, it got spoken. For me, I can deal with when it's out there. The power of me will say, I can do something about that. I had to rethink what I needed to do in California. There's still laws on the books back then about nobody Black be on the streets, probably Black and brown, but I do know Black, here in Sacramento. When I got here in 1989, those were still on the books. It took a lawyer to get them off the books, but racism is expressed very differently in a place that considers itself very progressive, very open. It is much more subtle than that. And I had to then recalibrate myself to the work that needs to be done here, because it has to be done differently, because people don't want to own their own biases.
All right. So students are opting out of going to colleges and universities because they believe that the educational programs aren't important. What are your thoughts?
So I learned a long time ago, which is, and it may be unfortunate, but that my education is a proxy. And your education is a proxy that you were able to get through something. You were able to get through, and you got 2 years of community college, and you got an associate degree. You were able to get through high school, and you now have a high school diploma, or you were able to get through and you got a GED. Those are proxies. It doesn't mean how smart you are necessarily. It means that you stayed with something and you got through it. Now I say that with also the recognition of why you're there, and there's a couple of things I can say. Okay, so you don't think one doesn't think it's important. However, most of the jobs that are being created require some college, some college. So the question I would say to somebody, and again, they may not buy it, because I've got family members who don't want to step back on a community college campus. The question then becomes, do you want a quality of life and to be able to afford the things that, I don't want to say make life worth living, because that's not, our relationships with people make life worth living. But we live in a high we live in a high cost state, and the question becomes: I won't even. I'm 75 years old, so I've been working a whole lot of years. The question becomes: how do I move up mobility-wise relative to the things that would help? I wanted to get both my children through college. I wanted to own a home. I wanted worthwhile, a worthwhile job. And even back when I started a job that I stayed in for 20 years, I got some training. I went to a little training thing. I got some training to get that. So maybe the academic part of transferring to a 4-year does not get to everyone. It is, everybody still needs a job, even with my children who are now. It was acting as a proxy because I wanted them to have an education. I wanted them to be citizens and residents of not only the state, not only the nation, but of the world. And I wanted them to be able to navigate through. And part of that requires education, but the other part of it is, I want you to have a job. And I kept on saying, I want you to have a job with benefits. And I want you to be able to ultimately live on your own, because and be able to do that and thrive and thrive. So when someone says they don't think it's important, what part of it don't they think is important? If they don't think math and English are important, or taking a sociology class or a psychology class or the general ed portions, but how are they going to live in this world? And then what kind of makes, if they are going to do that, what are the things that they care about? And that's the other piece. I think so many folks and young people, and I'll just speak about my own family members, they don't necessarily know what's available to them on community college. There's 200 career education programs on many community college campuses. But many of our students don't even know that they exist. They don't even know that you can walk out of the job and make $110,000 in a career education program. Where there are jobs, dental hygiene, graphic art, in terms of where that is going in terms, and I can't think of the term that's used, but there's nursing, there is electrical, there is digital. So it's about trying to help students navigate what are their interests and what do they want to do. Do they still, there are lots of jobs. There's Burger King, there's Target, there's Walmart, there's Home Depot. That will only take you so far. And if you're willing to do that, or to keep doing 2 and 3 jobs in order to make ends meet, okay. But hopefully what we need to do is to help to make education relevant, because that's the other piece. And the high school, and part of this is about the high school experience. Many of those students have been turned off about their experience through K-12. And so we do have to change. We do have to change even how we teach and how we engage students much earlier, and then and be able to share with them the opportunities in this new world of work, because it is a new world of work that is out there.
Okay, so there's a lack of funding for research opportunities in community colleges.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans on how you might increase those funds?
So let me first say that community colleges are not research institutions. That's not their role. And so for most colleges, my district and others that The research team are 2 and 3 people. And I don't see that increasing, because that's not what we do. That's what, and it actually isn't very much of what CSU does. It's what UC does. So if indeed you want an opportunity to do that, I would recommend going to a CSU or going to a UC in that area. My daughter-in-law is a research, she got a PhD, and her emphasis is in research, and so she's been able to use that. But she uses it in government. She's back in the Washington D.C. area in Virginia, and she recognized that she didn't want to be a teacher. So, but that's not going to change. What I will say is that there are organizations and there are research entities that focus in on community colleges. The RP group is one, PPIC is another, Campaign for College Opportunity is another. There are a number of organizations that the community colleges go to do research, or go to a university that has a large research arm. That's not our mission. That's not our calling relative to that.
And our last question is going to come from our advisor, and that is, what's the view on the upcoming ethnic studies requirement? And do you have any ideas about anti-racism curriculum?
So, let me just say that I believe in ethnic studies. I mean, my emphasis when I was in college was history, political science, with an emphasis on American institutions and African institutions. A lot of the courses that I gravitated toward in both of those had to do with the African American experience, or the African experience relative to colonization and then post-colonization. So I care about the issues. I am glad that there is a movement to bring ethnic studies system-wide. But there is this challenge, and there is this rub. So I want to be very candid and to make it a requirement. And I haven't looked at the final bill or the final language, so forgive me. I may have some of these things wrong. One of my concerns was, when you make it a requirement, what you do is you're increasing units to graduate. And when you increase units to graduate, then you can potentially increase the time to graduation or to transfer, and that's problematic for who are really what we're trying to do is to decrease the units for graduation. The reason why we have an ADT for transfer as opposed to just having and an AST having to do with the sciences. Now there are majors where, and the sciences are the ones I'm thinking of now, that require more units to transfer. So it would now require not just looking internal to the existing faculty, but to ensure that we have faculty to teach these courses. And I'm very dismayed that CSU has pushed down that requirement to all of the community colleges, because they see it as a now a general ed requirement, and they want to make certain that they don't have to teach it when they come to a CSU, and I suspect that UCLA feels exactly the same way. So it's been pushed down. And so while I haven't gotten deeply involved in how that's going to work relative to Los Rios, I will be paying attention to it as it comes before the board, if it does come further before the board. And the other piece of this is, and I'm just going to say it, and then I will apologize if I need to afterwards. There are faculty who say, "Oh, I teach history. I can teach ethnic studies." That may be true, but I would hope that there are folks of color who teach ethnic studies, and bring their experience with it. Now there are good instructors, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, who are down and who understand the issues that have confronted this country for 400 years, and can blend that into this discussion that should go on relative to ethnic studies. But I would like to see that discussion, because it's now for everyone. It's not just for Black and Brown people. It's not just for Asian Pacific Islanders. It's not just for our for Native Americans. It's for everyone who are in certain fields, whose programs are in certain fields. So I know that was kind of a fudge question, answer, I should say, not a fudge question. It was a fudge answer. I'm looking to see what's going to happen. And with regard to anti-racist curriculum, I think every course, when we segmentalize some of these issues, we denigrate them to not being responsible for it to be everyone's issue. So we need to be anti-racist in every course. Everyone's sitting in front of the classroom, everybody's sitting in a seat, everybody's online, to make a determination of fairness and equity and responsiveness to the students that are in our courses. And so ethnic studies is American history. That's what but we once again we've compartmentalized. And I understand. I know the author, and I know she had good intentions, and it's a first step. Legislation is sometimes a progression. But what we need to be talking about is American history, and be inclusive of all of us, because we help to make American history. We are making American history now, and things should not be segmentalized in a way that we think, oh, this is discrete, and so therefore, oh, white folks don't have to pay attention. That's about Black and Brown people. That's about Asian Americans. This is about us in this country. So it's about all of us. And that's the inclusiveness that has to happen, that I think at times can be missing. And so my hope is that every step of the way, we are looking at all of our curriculum from that lens and from that perspective.
And that will be it for the interview.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was fun. And I appreciate your interest in me and in the work that you're doing as students. I have much greater faith in the students that has been confirmed relative to George Floyd. There have been years in which I'm saying, oh God, where are the young people? Why aren't they speaking up? Why don't I see them? I had an opportunity during this pandemic to go to a few rallies. It's the only place where I've gone. I've taken my chances with my mask and all of those things to not only to participate, but to be in unity with across generations of folks, but most importantly, with young people who have basically gotten out into the streets with other brothers and sisters, regardless of race and regardless of ethnicity, and said, this is not the country we want to be in, and we want to see change. And so my only closing comments is that those things around George Floyd are still happening, and we've got to do more relative to our police departments, and hopefully the new administration will stay focused in on critically important things. But when you talk about advocacy, it does not stop with an incident. It has to be ongoing. And so that's the only thing. And America has a very short memory. The reason why George Floyd got as much attention was everybody was stuck at home, looking at their TV 24/7. And that's the only reason, because there had been 277 deaths prior to George Floyd, and there have been dozens of deaths since George Floyd. So it is a moment in time. And the only way it's not a moment in time is that we keep pressure on where we need to in our communities. And with that, I want to thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking your time.
All right.
For answering our questions.
My
Have a great
pleasure.
day.
You too. Bye-bye.